we're poisoning people with unhealthy food because of cost.
We are going in the wrong direction. Different diets, keto, vegetarianism, vegans are starving to death.
Fitness influencer Zane Griggs.
Zane Griggs.
Zane Griggs, the author of Kicking Ass After 50.
We're watching health decline, obesity rates going up, diabetes rates going up, big meals or 10 ounces of meat. Everything else is wrong.
If you want to optimize your health, what would you do?
Consistency is probably more important than which tool you're using. It's become trendy to talk about, but I think...
So welcome to this week's episode of the Vinny Show. I'm excited to have Zane Griggs in the studio with me today. And this episode is ready for everybody who wants to live healthy into and past their 50s. And it really starts, I think, in your 20s and 30s even, starting to think about what health looks like and is going to be like as you age. And so I've invited Zane in today because, as I hit my 40s now, I'm trying to think like what I need to do to be, healthy all the way through into, mid and late life and have, just less issues than people I've seen in their 50s and 60s and 70s and not be on, chronic medication, etc. So this episode is for everyone who really cares about their health. Zane, welcome to the studio.
Thank you, Vinny.
Great.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, you're from Nashville.
Yes. Weather's much better here.
Thanks for flying in. So, maybe let's give the audience some of your background, and I'll chip in with some of the things I think is interesting. But obviously, you're the author of that book over there,
Yes.
Kicking Ass After 50. I bought it, I read it, and I reached out to you and said, look, I'd love to have you on the show. It's really great to have someone who's done all the research to put this sort of book together. You probably cited like 100 different sources for your research in the book.
I try to make it less about my opinion and make it more about what is available out there that we don't see. There's a lot of these are research articles that do not get press. They don't get media because they're not popular and they don't fit a narrative.
Yeah, and no one's going to read them.
No one's going to read them.
Exactly.
Yeah, there's a bunch of I try to put summaries in there, but really base the text of the book off of what we know about these in a simple form.
How did you get into this industry? How did you get to this point and where people are actually just listening to what you have to say about fitness and health and nutrition? And, you're in your 50s and you look great. You're
53.
53, in best shape of your life, basically.
25 was a lot easier. And I like myself better now, smarter. I'm smarter about it. And I think that's the whole point of the book. It's like you're reaching the point in your life where you're at maybe the peak of your career. Mm-hmm. You've got all this decades of wisdom, of influence. Your circle of influence is bigger. You can get more done. Why would you want to impair that wisdom and all that knowledge and experience that you've built over decades by having poor health?
Yeah.
And so you can do something about it. So we're watching health decline. Like every 5 years, it just seems to get worse and worse and worse. Obesity rates going up, diabetes rates going up. And so this is for that guy or woman who wants to hang on and be able to leverage their wisdom and leverage all those decades of experience into 50s, 60s, 70s. You don't have to retire if you don't want to. Yeah. You can have an impact in whatever it is you want to do. I had an interest in longevity in my 20s, which is a little early for most people, but I started playing with different diets. I played with vegetarianism. I did 7-day juice fasts, and it was just kind of, we didn't have the internet going back in the 90s, so we had to read, we had to experiment and talk to people, and so it was a kind of an experimental phase. And then I decided I wanted to get into fitness and health and became a trainer, and so that really became the focus because that was the demand of my clients at the time.
And you were a fitness model as well.
Fashion model. I mean, I did Europe and Milan, all that, so I wasn't really doing much fitness stuff. I mean, like a calendar here and there.
You had to look good for it. So.
Yeah, I had to stay in good shape. I was already lifting in college, and I was interested in staying lean and staying fit. Mm-hmm. I just started reading and getting into the whole, what's the best diet for avoiding disease as we get older? That became an interest of mine early on. Mm-hmm. As I got into fitness again, I got kind of distracted towards weight loss and started looking at diets. And my wife had just delivered her third child, and she was having a little trouble getting the weight off. She's about 30, and she said, "Well, I'm gonna try the Atkins." She tried it, and the weight doing everything else the same, the weight fell off. 20 pounds fell off. I thought, okay, there's something to this. Now, my peers, when I mentioned this to them, my other trainers I work with, well, that's dangerous. That's a dangerous diet. That's
low carb, because the government says you have to have this high carb diet.
You have to have a high carb diet for all things. I understand for athletes, but for a woman who's just had a baby, she's 30, she's trying to drop some pounds. Why is this? What's dangerous about it? The point is, it worked. You know, it worked. So I started sharing it with my clients. It worked with them.
I mean, for those who don't know what the Atkins diet was, basically it was a
Very low
carb, lots of bacon, and like
it was a higher fat. It was basically like a keto diet.
Exactly. So today's version of a keto
diet, and you had there was some room for very low glycemic fruit here and there, but for the most part, it's a ketogenic diet.
Yeah, it doesn't work for everyone either, right? So.
Well, it was great for weight loss. It's a weight loss tool.
No, but there are people who've tried like low carb diets, high fat diets, and their body's just not fat adapted.
Right, and I don't know that it always has to be high fat. But the thing is, if you restrict carbohydrates, you need to raise some protein.
Sure, that's the key. Raising the protein, because the thermic effect of protein's pretty high. So
you're sparing muscle tissue, lean mass,
and you're working out as well.
Right, I think that's ideal. I don't think there's just a one like here, just do this. But for many people, it was effective enough with everything else they were doing, they were stuck. And so she was already working out. She was already paying attention, but she just pulled back on the carbs and the weight fell off.
So that was an aha moment for you.
It was an aha moment for me. Okay. Fast forward a few more years, I started 2009, 2010 reading about intermittent fasting. Started personally experimenting with intermittent fasting, then moved on to my clients. My clients were into it. So a low carb intermittent fasting kind of combo that I would try to use, as tools for my clients.
Where have you landed on intermittent fasting? What do you think is the right intervals? So I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Well, they've changed over the last couple of years. Now, I was, like I said, a low carb intermittent fasting, doing fasted workouts. And for me, when I got in my late 40s, I started feeling that. Like it was those are all stressors. Those are all tools that create metabolic stress. I was creating too much metabolic stress for someone who was already lean, who was working out pretty hard frequently, and 47, 48, 49 years old. It was a little too much for me. I wasn't recovering. I looked great. I looked lean. I was solid, but I didn't feel great. I wasn't recovering very quickly. Strength was impaired. I wasn't really getting the growth I wanted in muscles. So I had to learn to back off on pulling all those stressors. So I treat them like tools. It really taught me the hard way that these tools need to be applied with strategy, and that they don't affect everyone the same way. Like, so if you're pulling all those stressors, your cortisol levels are going to be high. Yes. So that's going to actually cause you to create more glucose. Actually,
the dawn effect, where you wake up at like 5 a.m. in the morning,
and you're breaking down amino acids or proteins to do that. Yeah. High cortisol can actually affect. There's a substrate called like sex hormone binding globulin, which would then reduce your available testosterone or your free testosterone in your body. So if you create too much stress, your testosterone levels will drop. Well, that's obviously going in the wrong direction.
Hi, this is Vinny. Thank you for being a viewer or subscriber to my channel. And if you are a viewer and not a subscriber, please hit the subscribe button. I love producing content for you guys, and I really, really appreciate all the feedback and the comments that you post. I want to hear from you about which guests you want to see on my show, and more importantly, which questions you want to ask them. I'm going to try my best to get them on just for you. Thanks so much. And now back to the show. And I've noticed with women,
yes,
fasting is not
ideal, especially if they're in the childbearing years, where it'll definitely affect their cycle.
During their cycle as well. Definitely shouldn't do it.
It'll throw off the cycle.
Because it just pushes up cortisol quite a bit.
Right. It can throw off their whole cycle. And some women are more
prone to it.
More sensitive to it. Yeah. And it's not a one size fits all again. Yeah. But for the most part, I think women, adding a protein breakfast and really focusing on getting enough protein in there that can you can get the effect or the desired effect that you would get from fasting without as much stress. And that's really what they're after anyway. Right?
Well, no, but it's cool. I want to go into archetypes, because I think it's like important that we sort of categorize people in maybe 2 or 3 different buckets. So what would you say to someone who's reasonably lean, fit, and just wants to focus on things like, they hear about autophagy, which is cleaning out the cell debris.
You need more than just your typical intermittent fasting schedule. You really start seeing autophagy after about 24, really more like 48 hours. So I would say a periodic, so maybe quarterly, you do a 3 or 4 day fast to really get that autophagy going, and then you go back to a normal diet. Like, I think 12 hours is a good, safe, schedule for most people to fit their meals in.
So you finish your last meal by like 7, you start having breakfast 7 the next morning. That should be good for you.
Yeah, 11, 12 hours is plenty enough of a spread.
Okay.
If you don't feel stressed from doing it 10 hours or 11 hours or 9 hours, it's not having a negative effect, then don't worry too much about it. But I think, like you mentioned, women and younger women who are childbearing years, if they're having issues with that, then they need to start looking at what stressors there could be. It's just stress.
Okay.
But if you have weight to lose, like the different archetype, then it's a great tool until you get down to that lean point. But lean people really don't need to create that level of stressors. You can get the benefits you're after from fasting without having a 3 or 4 hour or 3 or 4 day full water fast quarterly.
If you have a 7-day water fast once a year, you drop your risk of cancer like 70% or something.
Right, that'd be real effective.
Yeah. Needs to lose 20 pounds, 30 pounds. What fasting schedule on a daily basis would you recommend for them?
I would say an 18 or a 16-8 could be effective if everything else is right. So just saying I'm on a fast, but you don't change the rest of your diet, like what you're actually eating, then you're going to have mixed results.
It doesn't really matter at that point.
I mean, you're not going to have the same results if someone make sure they're getting adequate protein in that 8-hour window, and they're strength training, and they're really managing their sleep. There isn't one tool that does it all.
Yeah.
And so just because you're fasting doesn't mean you're going to get the same effect as somebody else. You could be creating a stressor, but then offsetting your benefits by not getting. So I think it's a great weight loss tool if it's not causing a problem for you. I would say it'd be different for men than it would be for women. Okay. I've had a recent client who was fasting. We increased his protein during that fasting window, but he wasn't doing any strength training at the time. He was doing some running, some floor work like Tibetans, yoga style movements, and his weight just wasn't budging. He's about 40 years old, and he wanted to drop about 15 pounds. We added a protein breakfast. So I said, okay, forget the fasting for now. Let's see if we can add protein in and do 2 strength training workouts a week. The first week, he dropped 4 pounds. The second week, another 2. And now he's starting to progress. And it was just that his body, for whatever reason, wasn't responding to that level of stress, or it wasn't getting enough protein, so it was hanging on to that fat. And so there's a little bit of nuance where you almost have to see that how that individual responds. Yeah. Some clients who respond very well to intermittent fasting, and they get down to their ideal weight.
Everyone's got a different opinion
or
on this
just
stuff.
The next 25-year-old influencer who looks good in a swimsuit.
Yeah. And then everyone's got a different perspective. And exactly. I did a 42-hour fast last weekend. I felt great. I didn't eat. I stopped eating on Friday night, and I went all the way to Sunday.
Yeah,
and it was 42 hours. I started getting hungry. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna eat now. But even the whole of Saturday, I just felt amazing.
Many people do like a 12. They start at 11 or 12 and eat till 7 or 8 p.m. You just mentioned 9 to 5. Well, there's a lot of studies as well as just anecdotal evidence
ETRF
that
fasting.
Eating it early. Start
ETRF.
your fasting at like 9 to 5. Finish eating by 5.
Yeah.
And start front loading your day with not just calories but also the higher protein and everything else. That can have a different impact on someone's weight loss.
Eating 4 hours or less before you go to bed will spike my resting heart rate 15 beats per minute on average.
Yeah.
It affects my HRV as well. Yeah. If you're going to sleep at like 9 or 10, you should have your last meal down by like 6.
For sure.
I got invited out to dinner the other night, and I just couldn't eat that late. It was just not possible for me. If you start tracking when you time your final meal for the day, it has a big impact on how the next day is performance-wise. And so there's this thing called ETRF, early time restricted fasting, where you start having your first meal at like 6 a.m. or 7 a.m. and you finish at like 3 or 4, whatever it is. And that's even better for you based upon the data I've seen.
Which is the opposite of where we were intermittent fasting early on, where, the popular schedules, research or studies showing that, as well as anecdotal stuff I hear from clients and from other people in the space, that when they shifted all their meals earlier, they had a tremendous impact. You're more insulin sensitive in the morning when you start eating that early. You have less cortisol, which is going to line you up or set you up to have a more relaxed evening, which you're going to get in that rest and digest kind of state, the parasympathetic.
Exactly.
State.
How has your diet changed from when you were in your 20s to where you are now?
So I was early 20s, again, in my search for ideal diet for longevity. I was modeling at the time, so I was trying to stay lean, kind of on the road. So I was getting a lot of input from different types of people that I wasn't, the world I didn't grow up in. Because before I was a college kid who's eating everything, I'd sit down with a half gallon of ice cream and a serving spoon and a movie and just shovel it in, and I just got bigger pecs, right?
Yeah, exactly.
College is just how it is. Yeah. But that was, the look change, the shift change with the waif look in the 90s and stuff. So I was trying to stay lean, but I was really looking for health. So I was a vegetarian. I was trying to say, oh, you didn't do it right. No, I did it right. I was having black beans and rice every day. We didn't have almond milk in the stores back then in the 90s. I was blending up raw almonds, putting a little water and honey in there, maybe a banana, making my own almond milk.
Okay.
Just trying to get nuts, beans, rice. Those were all daily staples to try to get the protein in. My weight dropped pretty quick. I could not put muscle on. I had a hard time recovering. And after about 3.5 years in, I got this virus that put ulcers in my throat and my mouth. Couldn't eat for 3 days. It just hurts so bad. So they put me on all these antibiotics. I'm like, what is going on? My doc said, normally you'd be able to fight something like this off, but your immune system is so suppressed. And he thought it was my diet. It's because of vegetarian diet. And because I was still working out, I wasn't recovering very well. So I added a little bit of like whey and some salmon and some eggs into my diet. It wasn't like I started chowing down on ribeyes, right? Add a little bit of those 3 things into my diet. The first 3 days I did that, I had realized I'd forgotten to drink coffee. Like I was drinking coffee today, go to work. 3 days later, I haven't even needed it. Like my energy level, my brain turned on, everything came back up after a number of weeks. I'm recovering. I feel better. I'm like, oh my gosh, I've been starving myself for the last 3.5 years in this little experiment, and I wasn't getting the clue until I got that sick. So that definitely shifted me away from vegetarianism and towards, and then I was just eating everything at that point. I was eating, trying to eat whole food, but I was still in my late 20s, early 30s. You can get away with more in your late 20s. You don't have the repercussions of more processed food in your diet. Started a family, but then when my wife, like I mentioned before, with the low carb diet being so beneficial for her, that started becoming a little more of my plan as well to manage leanness as I got into my 40s and the intermittent fasting. Now, protein is definitely the focus of my diet. Like I make sure I'm hitting, with a goal of 1 gram per pound of body weight, right? Daily. And then I will adjust, usually whole food. I really rarely touch a shake. I usually try to get that from meat, right? And I will manage carbs depending on my activity level, and I might even carb cycle a bit, where some days it's higher, some days it's lower.
Over 200 grams of protein a day without a shake, without taking an excess.
3-4 big meals of like I'm eating 8 or 10 ounces of meat in a meal, and I have to start earlier.
But is it red meat or is it?
I eat all kinds of meat.
How do you keep the fat levels down, or you just don't really track that?
I do track it. My fat levels are often fairly high. It could be 30% of calories. Fat-soluble minerals are in the meat of our A, D, E, and K are in the fat of meat.
Sure.
And so that is a nutrient source for me. There's choline. There's all sorts of nutrients in animal foods and meat, and it's in the fat, just like eggs. The choline, the most nutrient-dense part of an egg is in the yolk, which is what we were told to be scared of for so many years. I ate 3 or 4 eggs a day for 20 plus years without a cholesterol problem. I did my calcium score at 50, 51. It was 0. Well, I don't have calcium in my arteries. I don't have clogged arteries. It's that was all fallacy. That was all that was ideology mixed with corporatism to sell us processed food. So
you basically eat a very whole food diet.
Yeah, my carbs are fruit, potato, sweet potato. So I was hungry as a vegetarian. I was eating every few hours. I was hungry.
Yeah, and so a lot of it is these bars that are vegan friendly and this and that. And when you look at the ingredients, it's like preservatives. Sure, it's vegan, but it's also like a lot of that stuff is just really bad for you.
It's convenience food, and you can pack a lot of calories into any kind of processed food.
Yeah.
So usually very hot, typical processed foods, 40-50% carb, 40-50% fat, maybe 5 or 10% protein.
And seed oils. There's tons of
and
seed
the seed
oils.
That's your fat.
Yeah.
To hold it together, it doesn't go rancid very quickly. It's shelf stable, and it's not an animal fat, so it's got to be good for you, right?
Whole food diet. I have, I have a lot of meat in my diet. I have fruits and stuff like that. But like, I'm very worried about oxalates and even with beans and legumes, lectins and salicylates. I'm very, very conscious of all that stuff. But when I look at the science behind this, a more meat-based diet, a lot of the science that's published is actually sponsored by people who've got an agenda.
Oh, well, yes. That's because research requires money.
Yeah.
And so you've got to have money to fund, even if it's done at a school like Tufts or Harvard, the money's got to come from somewhere. And 99% of it comes from corporate food corporations, basically. That's who funds it. That's who funds our the A&D, the Nutrition Academy, and even the Dietary Guidelines Committee. That we had a study come out in 22 that showed 95% of them had some sort of corporate funding from one of these pharmaceutical and big food.
So when you look at the food pyramid, which we grew up with, right? Like you have to have 8 servings of grains a day, which includes Kellogg's. Yeah. Kellogg's is behind that.
Oh yeah, Kellogg's. And
I mean, I had a lot of Kellogg's growing up as a kid. I had lots of cornflakes.
There's basically 10 food corporations that own all the rest. There's a big 10, and you know them all. And they fund the research. They fund our nutritionists, the A&D who writes all the basically the curriculum for registered dietitians and who sets all these standards. They have a back and forth with these corporations like Coca-Cola and so forth. They're sending memos to them for approval. Can we issue this? I mean, they're actually like almost considered a spokesperson for the corporate food industry, So it's...
But we've never changed these food guidelines. We still have these guidelines where people should be eating ridiculous amounts of carbs.
It just changes shapes.
Yeah.
It's the plate, from pyramid to the plate. The Food Compass came out last year that was taken to the White House Council on Food, Hunger, and whatever that was. But it came out of Tufts where you had chocolate-covered peanuts and sugared-up cereals that were ranked as more healthy than beef, cheddar cheese, or whole eggs. So all the processed foods, I mean, the bottom 3, there was a ranking that just floated around the internet, and it was like all these processed foods that were sugared up cereals and candies and so forth, and then food substitutes like egg substitutes or meat substitutes. And the bottom 3 foods to stay away from were hamburger, cheddar cheese, and eggs. The whole foods that, how many humans have lived on cheese, meat, and eggs for long before we had metabolic disease, long before we had these obesity rate was 1%. That's what we were living on. Even with the whole foods, like you still have different grades of quality, like eggs, for example. You get the corn-fed, soy-fed chickens laying these eggs, and then they go do studies on those eggs, and then they go, oh, well, like when they do these studies, they don't use organic pasture-raised eggs to do a study. They go use the cheap stuff they buy it wherever, and then they go and like the results speak for themselves. And let's talk about corn-fed and grain-fed animals. They're metabolically unhealthy. Their meat is full of omega-6 fatty acids because of that. Right.
And so what you have is let's just talk about meat from like McDonald's, for crying out loud. That is not grass-fed, pasture-raised.
It's going to have more fat in it, and the fat is not the fat that you
want. It's the omega-6. And so for those listening, omega-3s are anti-inflammatory and omega-6s are inflammatory. And you want to reduce, and all the blue zone research, all that other stuff, some of it's crap, some of it's not, but all the research out there points to one thing. The lower your ratio of omega-3, so 6s or 6s to 3s, I should say, the longer you're going to live, because the anti-inflammatory benefits of omega-3s outweighs the inflammatory benefits of omega-6s. And pretty much any nutritional scientist, and I've read and seen so many studies and listened to all of them, they all agree that we should be reducing omega-6s in our diets intake, because your body can produce a small amount, but you don't need as much as you think, and you will get it anyway through things that you have. So, for example, oils. I stick to coconut oil, olive oil. You shouldn't heat olive oil. I do macadamia nut oil and avocado oil for cooking and whatnot. Those are the ones that are high in omega-3s, low in the linoleic acids that are bad for you. So never heat up olive oil is another tip. Olive oil heated up, you're basically oxidizing the bonds. And
Well, a lot of our olive oil on the shelf
it's
too.
cut. It's cut.
It's cut with soybean oil.
Yes,
Yeah.
which is-
and so
which
the
is-
cheaper ones, you really have to get a high end.
No, yeah, I
olive
get
oil.
I get guaranteed like off a farm that is olive oil.
But the average
100%.
person walking through the grocery store, you've got 3 shelves of olive oil.
Yeah, they don't know what
of
to pick.
various grades,
Yeah.
and there's no way.
and
to
they go
know.
for the cheap. People need to get more aware of what they're paying for. Yeah.
Basically, you've got a lot more cheap oils in those, and avocado oil than even the olive oil. So it's less.
Well, they tested this, by the way.
They tested it.
They did a supermarket test a few months ago,
Yeah.
and they picked like 20 brands of the supermarket, and pretty much 90% of the stuff is cut with seed oils.
It's a lot less regulated.
And poor health right now is becoming more and more linked to seed oils. There's a seed oil problem in America, and it's not necessarily the seed oils itself, because the seed oils have obviously they make high omega-6s, but a lot of the chemicals they use to cut the seed oils stay
hexane
behind.
and so forth.
Exactly, which causes problems as well.
That causes problems. The thing is, our ratios of omega-6s has increased so much since, let's say, if you go back 1800s, maybe we got 3 to 6% of our dietary fat would have been maybe omega-6, and omega-3s would have been very similar, 2, 3, 4%.
1-to-1 ratio, basically.
Pretty close, or 2
Yeah.
to
Or
1,
even 2
even
to
a
1.
4 to 1 would
Yeah.
have been tolerable. We're at a place where it's
20
to 1
Yeah.
or more.
Yeah.
So there's a study showing that just since the 50s, since the late 50s, the concentration of those omega-6 oils in our body fat, in our adipose tissue, has increased by 136% just since the 50s. So maybe 20 to 30% of our body fat could be omega-6, where it should have been 3 or 4%.
And that's inflammatory, and
It's an inflammatory fat.
That leads to cancers and heart diseases and everything else.
Well, there's also evidence that omega-6s and omega-3s compete for the same enzymes that help us convert them to the longer chain fatty acids like EPA and DHA that we need for our brain. So if you have a lot of omega-6s, they're going to be competing for those enzymes. The omega-3s will not get, so we won't get as much use from our omega-3s because they're competing for the same processes in our body, and you've got an overwhelming amount where 20% of our calories coming in could be from these omega-6 oils like soybean oil.
And I highly recommend that people actually test their do an omega panel.
Yeah.
Check your what's the arachidonic acid levels.
Arachidonic acid, that's what.
And
the omega-6 converts to arachidonic
exactly.
acid, and then that breaks down, starts creating these aldehydes and
exactly. So
and
you should do a full panel. Speak to your doctor. You can do it yourself. Go to questlabs.com or whatever, and you can get the stuff done yourself, and then optimize your diet. For example, so I've been doing this for years, and I got to the point where my omega, I think I'm at a ratio of like 4 to 1, sixes to 3s, and I'm trying to get it lower, but like I'm okay with that. My biggest issue has been my DHA has been too high relative to EPA. So I've basically now supplemented EPA, high like a higher quality EPA omega-3. And so some people, what they do is they go buy this like omega-3, 6, 9. Those are the worst.
Oh
by
yeah,
the way.
you got everything in there.
When you go into like the Whole Foods and you buy these like complete omega profile supplements, that's just the worst thing you should do. The only thing I recommend is I do omega-3. I do fatty 15, which is omega-15 as well. But everything else, I kind of let my diet find. But as long as you just don't supplement 6s. I don't know why people buy 6 in supplements.
Well, a great point is you can't out-supplement yourself out of this. So you started by reducing your omega-6s.
Yes.
You can't take enough omega-3s to catch up to the amount of omega-6s that are coming in through a processed food or standard American diet. You need to reduce the 6s because, again, it's 20 to 1 or more.
Yep.
You cannot out-supplement that.
You cannot.
So you got to reduce the 6s, let your body start. It takes close to 2 years. The half-life of these omega-6s in our body is about 2 years. To get it from, if you didn't have any more coming in, go from 20% of your fat to 10%, which is still higher than you want it. So you've got to reduce this, you've got to eliminate them and then supplement, because the supplement is just that. It's a supplement. It's not a fix.
Not all food is created equal. It's just like the analogy I use a bottle of wine, like a $5 bottle of wine and a $500 bottle of wine. There's 2 different types of wine, right?
Correct.
And so you get different health benefits out of it. And so if you've ever had a bottle of really cheap wine, you feel really bad the next day, right? So that's the reason. The same applies to food. And so when we're looking at the food that we consume, when you go to the store and you see cheap eggs, it's probably high in inflammatory omega-6s and whatever else because they're feeding it corn, they're feeding it stuff that shouldn't be eating. The same applies to USDA, prime beef, etc. If it's inflammatory, I don't want to put it into my body.
Yes.
If it's anti-inflammatory, I really want to have it.
The health benefit of eating fish is the omega-3s, the
Exactly.
DHA and EPA that we were talking about before, that is our brain absolutely needs, and it's anti-inflammatory. And that they're going to get that from basically being in an ocean or river or whatever else, eating the marine life, so that's where they get those omega-3s. You put them in a trough and raise them and literally feed them corn.
Dyed corn. The meal's got dyes in it to make them, because the salmon comes out white outside the environments.
They got to dye the corn to color the meat.
Yeah.
But it's corn, which is going to provide an omega-6 concentration, much higher than omega-3s. You're really not going to have much omega-3 in there at all. So you lose the benefit, the health benefit of fish. And I don't see the
It's impossible to eat healthy when you're traveling, because you'll be basically going to starve, because
every restaurant's getting just
the restaurant is their job is to give you something that tastes good, not that makes your body feel better.
Well, and they're on a budget.
Yeah, and they're on a budget as well. The stuff gets expensive, right? Yes. So, and I'm not saying everyone can afford to eat this way, but the problem is we've built a society right now where we're poisoning people with unhealthy food because of cost. And trying to drive down costs. If our government spent the money better, and we would probably be in a better place in the food supply system.
We could subsidize the regenerative health or the regenerative agriculture to grow in the way
we're subsidizing corn in America.
We have since the 70s. The war on poverty, the war on was
cheap calories.
It's corn, soybeans, and I think wheat.
Yeah.
Why are we subsidizing these? Because we're subsidizing to the point that we can sell them to other countries cheaper than they can actually make them in their own countries. We're undercutting farmers in places like Africa, where we can sell it. We can create, because of subsidies, we can create it, ship it, sell it to them in their country cheaper than that local farmer can actually provide those crops. That doesn't sound sustainable or ethical to me.
No, it's
when you're undercutting a local farmer.
And we're poisoning our own people, because now we're feeding cheap corn to our animals, making them metabolically ill, and that makes us metabolically ill. And we wonder why if you look at all the charts of in the US, like metabolic health, cardiovascular disease, obesity, diabetes, everything is up and to the right over the past 30 or 40 years.
Yes.
So something is broken in our food supply chain.
Since the 70s, it's been worse. It's been growing since the 50s, but since the 70s, it's gone obesity from 13% to 42%, right? So I want to, I don't want to say push back, but I'm gonna argue with you just a little bit on with the grass-fed thing. If you can afford it, that's great.
Yes.
But the cheapest hamburger in that grocery store is still better than the most expensive cereal in the aisles.
100% agree with you.
Because that's going to have a greater concentration. So if all you can afford is the cheap hamburger and the cheap eggs and the cheap chicken and whatever produce you can find, you're going to be better off than eating the processed stuff in the aisles that is full of this, that is made from stem to stern of this stuff. There's good, better, best when you're shopping.
Yes.
And grass-fed is obviously the best.
Yes.
But do what you can to just get whole food, get that protein, and start moving that direction if you can. But it's good, better, best. It's not an all or nothing thing.
Over the long term, 90% of my diet tends to be optimized towards reducing omega-6s in my diet any way I can.
Well, you've done it. If you have a 4-to-1 ratio, you've succeeded. You're not getting any younger.
Yeah, and not getting younger either. So my body became more sensitive. So
that's a real thing.
Yeah.
I mean, there's things that we can tolerate in our 20s and 30s that our bodies will not. And stress, alcohol, lack of sleep, all the things we pushed through and did to ourselves in our 20s and 30s. If you keep doing your 40s and 50s, you're going to pay for it.
And I used to have fried chicken all the time. Like I grew up in South Africa is a very big fried chicken market. No problems. But you get to a certain point where your body says, this has got to stop, and you have to listen to your body. If there's one thing I could change about my mindset 20 years ago, which I've only realized now, is that recovery was the most important part of my training schedule. Like I can just keep going. Testosterone's really high. You're in your 20s. You're lifting weights every day. Swimming. I was doing whatever. And I look back at that. I'm going, you know what? I probably could have gotten better results if I just did like 2-day splits. So the knowledge I want to try and get on this episode is for people who are in their 20s, and here's some knowledge from guys who are older than you, who've walked the path, and wish we could have the 20-year-old sort of
Right.
body back
Recovery
and metabolism
back,
and recovery
hormone
back.
levels.
Hormone and even sleep. Like I slept
Oh,
very
yeah,
little.
slept like a rock.
I screwed up my sleep levels when I was
But
young.
when you did sleep, you weren't waking up randomly. You were
Exactly.
you slept like a rock.
Like a rock. Yeah, I would wake up. I was late for class all the time.
Yeah. No, it's tremendous, the impact of age on recovery. It does make you have to be trained smarter.
Yeah.
And because inflammation comes from our workouts,
Yeah.
and inflammation will actually impair your next workout. There's inflammation that occurs after your workout as a result of that you have to account for, and those rest days are for that. Your recovery is where you have probably the least room for improvement on a genetic level or on a training level. Like you can improve your strength tremendously, but you can't. Improving your recovery is far more difficult. But it's sleep, it's diet to some level. But definitely rest days are important to allow you to have the next workout be just as impactful or have that intensity.
Yeah.
And so if you have leftover inflammation from working out, say 3-4 days in a row, and you go into that next workout, your nervous system is going to still be inflamed. The muscle itself is going to have some inflammation in the tissues. You're not going to be able to get those motor units to fire. Not to get too technical, but basically you have high threshold motor units. That's where we have the most potential for growth, muscle growth. The type 2 muscle fibers. They're not all going to be able to fire on the same level if they're inflamed or you haven't recovered well enough. And so you're not going to get the impact or the growth or the strength from that workout that you're aiming for, because you haven't let yourself recover from the previous workouts. So it can actually have a very negative impact on your output, which then affects your adaptation.
Knowing what we know today. And would you recommend, like, how many days a week would you train? How much time off would you take? How would you alternate aerobic versus anaerobic exercises?
3 days a week would be
Of weights?
of strength training.
Okay.
Some people might be able to push 4.
Yeah.
If they're trying to grow, then that would be fine. But if they're just maintaining, 3's plenty.
Okay.
Three's very good for maintaining.
And you cover all body parts in those 3 days.
Right. Yeah, or
So
at least once.
pushing,
At least
pulling
once. It might
legs
be
or-
one that's a double. So you could do push-pull legs, or you could do like an upper body, lower body split, 2-day split, and you just have that next
I
round.
do 2 days, but I do upper
and
body,
you could do
lower body.
and you could put a day of rest between each one, like a Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Sunday. I mean, however you want to do. But if you worked out, if you did strength training every other day, most people would be able to recover pretty well from that, and you would get a lot of benefit. If you can just get 3 days somewhere in the week, that you're going to maintain muscle mass, or even progress and hang on to muscle and bone density and so forth. Cardio. If you're doing high intensity cardio or sprinting, you also want to treat that like a strength training program, where you're not doing that 4 or 5 times a week.
Once or twice.
Yeah, once or twice.
Yeah.
You get that in.
Yeah.
Unless you're training for an event, you're an athlete who's competitive in that.
Sure.
Then that's a different story.
Athletes probably shouldn't be listening to us. To listen to your coaches.
No, of course.
Competitive athletes.
Right,
Like,
but your average person.
Yeah, every person is different. Yeah.
Yeah, you're just trying to maintain health and get the benefits from it without over leveraging a stressor. So 1 or 2 days of that kind of high intensity cardio, and then the zone 2 is great because it's enough to create an effect. So walking is good for movement, for blood flow, things like that.
But it doesn't get your heart rate up high enough.
No, it's not enough of an impact for a cardiovascular impact. It's good for after.
So you got to get above 70% for zone 2, roughly.
Yeah, give or take. Yeah,
So you get 70%.
70%.
Because Peter Attia says that you should be doing. I mean, I think his one comment I heard him say was like, if he had a choice, if he had the ability, he'd do 8 hours of zone 2 every week.
That would be, for most people,
Which is about an hour a day and some change.
beneficial. Yeah. That would be great. I mean, most of us would have a hard time fitting that into our schedules. But I think you can do zone 2 is enough that you're going to get the impact on your cardiovascular benefits without having as much a negative effect on training or overtraining or recovery.
Yeah, that's what he says. You can go a long time on zone 2.
It's just enough to have an impact without so much that you're going to have
and then he does zone 5 like once a week or something on top of that.
Yeah, that'd be plenty.
Yeah.
Or some kind of high intensity.
So, a lot of women in particular, actually, they don't do enough strength training. They do a lot of the cardio side of things.
Right. Or when they do strength training, they're not taking it to a level of
and then the opposite
fatigue
for
and
men.
failure.
Opposite for men. I see a lot of
Overdoing
men
it.
overdo the weights. They don't do enough cardio. And so I think you got to try and find the balance here. And I think the healthiest people I know do both, and they fit it in.
Yeah, it shouldn't be an either. Which is better? I mean,
Yeah.
you see these social media posts, and then they're like, "Which is better? This is better." Why are we? Why are we? They're all good. Why are we trying to vilify something that's a benefit?
Yeah.
What's not good is sitting in your chair for 8 hours a day.
In today's world where everyone's really busy, it's hard for me to go and jump on the Peloton knowing that I'm waiting for a text or I'm busy changing someone. But when I'm on the treadmill, I can just keep going. Text comes in, reply, go back.
You'll spend more time doing it.
And you maintain your heart rate. So my recommendation is, after lots of trial and error, that a treadmill is way better for people who are really busy, because you won't sacrifice the kilowatts and intensity. Because you're gonna fall off if you do.
Right. You have to pay. It keeps moving. Your road's moving.
The road's moving. You don't have a choice. You just keep going.
No, I think they're great. I mean, anything you can get yourself to do that's close to home, make it as convenient as possible. When I got my rack where I can start lifting at home, and I have a spin bike. I've got an assault bike now.
Have you tried a tonal at all?
I think anything that helps you become more consistent with it is beneficial. I'm not going to say, "Oh, do tonal. You got to lift free weights." No, that's silly. Anything that gets you strength training is going to be. I use a lot of bands. I use a lot of those big bands and use that for the dynamic resistance. Machines are great for growth because you don't have to stabilize, and you can really focus those primary movers. I think tonal would be similar in that you have less stability required, so you can really get a lot of contraction out of it. And if increasing the eccentric, that's great too. Anything that gets you moving and working out, convenience and motivation, which will keep you consistent. Consistency is probably more important than which tool you're using, or even great technique. It's just showing up more
Absolutely.
often.
Motivation around that.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go on to the next topic, which I think is dear to your heart and mine. As you know, I'm an amateur biohacker. I've been doing this for like a while, over 10 years. And so I have a range of supplements that I take. Everything's great. So I invest heavily in dietary supplementation.
Okay.
What do you take? Because I know I'm like a freaky, weird person when it comes to this stuff. What is like a fitness professional like you take on a daily basis?
Daily basis. So for me, especially as I've gotten older, sleep is a big hurdle. And there's a lot of, again, I track with Oura Ring. Everything I can do, it's probably the big mystery, the big frontier that we all have to tackle as we age. And so most of my supplements that I'm taking on a daily basis are around helping me get a better night's sleep.
So what is your sleep stack?
Well, magnesium is big.
Okay, which variant of it?
Glycinate. I think 3 and 8's great too.
Yeah. You take glycinate before bed. This is the stuff you take before bedtime, right?
Yeah, glycinate. Okay. I do take tryptophan because it's a precursor to melatonin, so I can produce my own, because as we age, we just reduce. And then all the light exposure, the screen exposure reduces melatonin.
Do you use the blue light glasses?
Yes, I wear blue light glasses
I have
at
those
night.
as well.
I try to, and then what you mentioned, it's not a supplement, but eating earlier affects all that as well.
Absolutely.
So, but magnesium, tryptophan, glycine. I take a good amount of glycine before bed.
How many grams do you take?
It's at least 10 to 20 grams. No, so not a ton.
Grams?
Or not. So I do probably a teaspoon of it, or two teaspoons worth of glycine under my tongue and just let it dissolve.
What about inositol? Any of that?
I have some. I haven't been taking it. I've done that before at night. I probably could get back to it. Yeah. It's sitting on my fridge.
I take a triple formula of magnesium.
So 3 different compounds of magnesium.
Yeah, I take. It's called BioEmblem. It's got like 3 different ones in it. So it's got citrate, it's got glycinate, and it's got
3 and 8 probably.
No, it's got
oxide.
So there's 3 in there. Then I take the glycinate separately. But I take it earlier in the day.
Okay.
And then I have inositol, glycine, and apigenin as well, which is a chamomile extract.
Okay.
And I actually sleep pretty well. I mean, except when I have alcohol.
Which will wipe it all out.
Alcohol disrupts everything. So
yeah, there's no good supplement.
Yeah. One tip on alcohol. Actually, I've got 3 tips on alcohol I'll give for the listeners. And I've said this before. The one is, try and finish your last drink about 3 hours before you sleep, so your body can filter it out. So if you do that, and then try and have, if you have 2 or 3 drinks, that's fine, but try not having too much. And I take there's Michaela Peterson's got this company called Fuller Health. I take After Party. That helps a lot, breaking down the alcohol. And then the other rule I've implemented recently now is I don't drink 2 nights in a row. drink 2 nights in a row, that second night's sleep is really disrupted. But if I give it 24, 48 hours afterwards, it might, the glutathione levels rise and everything's back to normal in your liver. So as you get older, I just think that alternating, if you have to drink 2 or 3 times in a week, just try and put a day in between. So now when people say, "Hey, Vinny, come over for a drink, let's hang out," I often look, no, I'm having dinner the night before. I'm going to skip that night, come the next night, and it gives my liver a chance to recover. So those are the 3 or so tricks that I've learned with drinking. I drink wine on a regular basis.
I basically stopped drinking for the most part because of my sleep to really improve it, because it will have that effect.
Yeah, it's not good for recovery.
It's terrible.
It's terrible.
It's really there's no real benefit to alcohol.
No, it's fun and it's social, and we live in the social
enjoyable.
world.
Most of my weight loss clients, I can tell you, I tell them, if you have 2 drinks a week, you'll probably still keep losing weight. And I mean 2 drinks, whether it's 1 drink on 2 different days or 2 drinks at one night, you can get away with it. More than that, it's a toss-up as whether you're going to keep losing weight. And I've had clients who are doing everything right. Intermittent fast, a guy in his 40s, intermittent fasting, lifting 3 times a week, doing cardio, eating whole food, doing everything right, but he was still coming home and having drinks 3, 4, maybe 5 nights a week. As soon as we cut that down to 1 night a week, he went from losing a quarter pound a week to losing 2+ pounds a week.
That's huge. Yeah.
And so it gets in the way of your body's ability or your liver to process fat, not just in the acute time that you're processing it, but overall it's chemical.
It's a toxin.
It's not just empty calories. It's a toxin. It has a chemical, biochemical effect in your body's ability to process your energy, your fats and sugars and so forth, and it will raise your blood sugar. So, bunny trail there, but it's worth saying if someone's struggling with their weight and they're doing everything right, check your alcohol intake. But so random supplementation that seems to help my sleep. I occasionally will do. You're familiar with Somorelin? It's a peptide that mimics human growth hormone. It's supposed to be like the peptide version for H.
I did ask my doctor about this, and he was very skeptical about it.
My wife and I both will just do a little injection of it. She's a nurse, and she'll get some, and little sub-Q, and it really seems to help our sleep. We will take it right before bed. We'll do it right before we do a little injection, but it's because of the peptide. Okay. And it seems to really help my deep sleep.
Really? Okay, interesting.
And we'll inject. Before I knew I was getting on a plane to fly out here, I did a little injection of glutathione because she'll come home with some of those, and so boost my glutathione before. But it's not something I'm going to do daily because you create it endogenously, and so forth. But if I want a little boost or feeling immune, I want a little immune boost, I might inject a little glutathione. But
I take glutathione basically daily. I mean, a lot of people hate on the oral stuff and think you have to inject everything. But even like NAD plus, NMN, everyone's like you should take. Most of the science says
you can take it orally.
Orally is fine. If we were born with some sort of a valve that you can kind of open up and then you can put stuff in it, I'd be like, okay, maybe. But we have to then pierce the skin. I'm sure there's a different rate of absorption that happens. I'm not arguing about that. Yeah. But for the most part, this is how we get stuff into our body. Our body is trained to use your mouth to get things in.
Right. At that point, it's you making sure you have high quality
supplements
that you're taking orally.
Exactly.
Sometimes that's where the question is.
I'm a little skeptical on some of these results that you see because if you use high grade supplementation, you shouldn't have huge differences.
Right.
So I want to spend a little bit of time before we end off speaking about your book.
Well, thank you.
So please, So please tell me, what inspired you to write the book? Obviously your audience is well defined. People, kicking ass after 50. Right. How long did it take you, and what is it like working with Dr. Ken Berry?
Well, so it's a funny story. During COVID, everybody was kind of shut down, and I launched a little remote podcast, and it asked him to come on the podcast, and he was my first kind of bigger name guest who had a big following. And at the end of the podcast, he said, "Hey, what do you think about?" Because I was at the time was 49, he was 52. He said, "What do you think about writing a book for guys like us, guys who are over 50?" I'm like, "Yes, whenever. Just let me know. We'll talk." So several months later, he reached out. "Hey, let's get started on this book." So we basically both threw up on a Google Doc everything we were thinking of, and then we started trimming it down until we came to. I got an editor, so started basically trimming it down into what was something that could be. What's the most relevant information that we can convey in a very useful way, like something that's not over the average person's head, and we have action steps. So it's explain the science, help them so they can understand why this is happening or the history behind it. How did we get here? And then, we have a lot of references, as you've mentioned before, a lot of references in there to back up what we're saying. We try to explain it in a way that's very palatable and digestible for most people, and then give them action steps like, how do you implement this? And so it's a short, I want to say guide, because there's a lot in there besides just action steps, but we wanted to make it simple and quick for the average guy. He's not going to spend a lot of time reading. You're 50, you're busy, you don't have time to go through a 300-page.
Yeah, it was a quick read.
It's a quick read. It's simple to understand,
yeah.
but it gets to the point.
Yeah.
And so we wanted something that guys like us would be actually willing to read, and they felt like, oh, I can do this. I can have an effect here by doing these simple steps, and I know why I'm doing them. And I think that's really important for most men. If they know the why and they understand they can do a few simple things to just improve what they're doing, they're probably going to take action. And so the biggest motivator was to get guys who want to hang on to, like I mentioned before, their wisdom and continue to have an impact, and not let their physical health take them out of the game. That would have an impact to help them take action.
That's great.
So yeah, I'm working with Ken. Is fun. He's got a good sense of humor. He's a real he's fun. He's a good guy, people hear his Tennessee accent, and they hear it the way he talks to people, and he's very kind of like very straightforward. He's one of the most well-read people I know. The guy just plows through books on a monthly basis.
That's great.
And so he's motivated by creating a movement to put the basically the processed food industry out of business, or at least take a big chunk out of their profits. He's a very grassroots kind of guy.
That's great. I mean, I'm very much anti-processed food, so I'm a huge fan of his. And it's he really explains things pretty well. Like he's
very simple.
It's very simple to understand. I encourage people to follow him on YouTube as well. So we've covered the nighttime routine. Okay. What do you do? What do you take during the day supplementation wise?
Now, I don't supplement a tremendous amount. I want to know that I have a need for it. When I was doing a lot of the fasting and low carb, and even still, I try to make sure I'm getting enough electrolytes. So I will put electrolyte supplement in my water almost all the time now. I use Relight. I love it. But there's a lot of good ones out there. But I might also supplement with some potassium, calcium during the day, because I'm taking in fat, like with a meal. So I'm taking in fat. That's going to help me absorb those. And creatine is a big one. I think for recovery, I've read recently some research showing it as it takes action almost like a neurotransmitter. So it helps brain health, but recovery and strength, power, it's beneficial. I mean, 5 grams of creatine is equivalent to the amount of creatine you would get in 2 pounds of beef. So it's really easy to just get that in there, and there's almost no downside to creatine. There's no risk. But it's really simple: minerals, creatine. I'm not a big collagen guy. I don't think it's bad, but I think I get it from the meat that I eat and all the connective tissue. And
you get bone broth as well. It's got lots of collagen in it.
Bone broth is great.
Yeah.
My supplement, I call it my supplement because I eat like a half an ounce to an ounce of beef liver on a daily basis. Yep. So it's one of the first things I'll usually eat. And that is so nutrient dense. It's the most nutrient dense food on the planet. You don't need a large amount of it on a daily basis because it is so many nutrients. You get too much vitamin A.
Well, if you have, for example, polar bear liver, you'll die.
Well, you'll die.
One ounce of it will
vitamin
kill
A
you.
toxicity.
Yeah.
But having half an ounce to an ounce on a daily basis of beef liver, you're getting so much choline, a lot of the fat soluble minerals, the K and E and D. I will supplement D. I live pseudo Midwest, Nashville. We don't get a lot of sun in the winter. I definitely miss my California sun that I grew up with, and so it has an effect kind of on mood. So I'll do some red light therapy, but I also have to supplement D to keep my D levels up. Yeah. And summer doesn't seem to be much of a problem, but the other half of the year.
But I actually take liver supplements every day.
Sure.
Just, in the pills, you get the
freeze-dried stuff.
Freeze-dried stuff. It's same thing. It's pretty bioavailable as well. I agree. Liver is very important.
So I try to take as whole food as possible.
I do too, but it's hard.
It's hard
because you have to get someone. You have to get the liver cooked. liver doesn't taste great.
No, it
for
doesn't.
most
That's why I have a
parts.
small amount. I like put it in the pressure cooker or
Yeah.
like a slow cooker for a short amount of time. Just cook it just enough with
Yeah.
some salt, and sometimes I throw some butter in there to add a little
Yeah,
flavor.
too.
But it's an ounce.
I know.
And you can make it work. But I mean, that's what the supplements are for.
Yeah.
But that is my primary. I consider that my primary daytime supplement is the liver because it's so nutrient dense.
It's actually pretty good. If you do chuck roast, and you can actually cut up the liver and cook it with the chuck roast, it actually comes out quite nicely.
Oh yeah, I know people that buy the minced, or ground beef.
Yeah.
With
And
the
the ancestral blends, those are actually pretty good.
Yeah,
as well.
ancestral blends are great.
I have that as
You
well. It's
get
got
it.
some heart in it and everything.
No, you can
else.
get your kids to eat it. They won't know. You can tell them when they're older.
Exactly. What would you recommend if you had to do one daily habit for fitness and health and whatever else? What would you do?
It's become trendy to talk about, but I think sunlight is very important, and so many of us are not getting enough of it. We don't get up, especially in the winter when it's darker later in the morning and it's darker earlier in the evening. We're not getting enough sunlight, which affects our sleep and our circadian rhythm, as well as vitamin D production, which then it can affect hormone levels and so forth. So I think I'm not saying, and there's people who say, oh, you got to get that early morning sun. You got to get the first 20 minutes of sunrise. Okay, we just need sun exposure. So if that's taking a lunch break, that's whatever it is, not through a window, but actually get some sun. I think that's something we're missing that that has been so controversial because we've been made afraid of the sun. We've been made afraid of sun exposure. So people are wearing sunscreen and wearing sunglasses in the winter, which to me sounds suicidal. And I would not. I'd be in a moody place if I was wearing sun. So I think, especially in the winter, but get some sunlight in your eyes, on your skin, on a regular basis, just to help us sleep. Which is, I think, that
Circadian rhythm.
circadian rhythm,
optimization.
which we've kicked to the curb for so long.
It's very important.
And right now, it's still a mysterious kind of like we don't know what changes that. So if you get sunlight, if you have trouble sleeping, I would say start eating earlier. Like if you have trouble sleeping on a regular basis, you definitely, whatever fasting window or eating window you have, shift it to earlier in the day. So it doesn't mean you can't intermittent fast. It just means your intermittent fast needs to start somewhere between 7 and 9 o'clock in the morning. Set up your circadian rhythm and lowering cortisol by starting your eating earlier in the day. That really, I think, and I made that mistake for years. So speaking from experience, when I started eating earlier, it helped my sleep.
Even Northern California, and sometimes you have this like we have like June gloom where there's just no sun.
Right.
I bought myself a Juve machine.
Yeah, I have one.
So you go in as well. It's great. So if I have a day where there's no sun, I just go put this thing on for like 12 minutes and just get put your little glasses on.
Oh yeah, I have a panel. And
A panel. You get in front of it, and so I recommend that as well. We can link that in the show notes as well. But I think this is a really good insight because people who spend too much time indoors, they have
red light therapy is a good supplement, and do it. Try to get it in before sunset.
Before sunset.
Because again,
it's funny.
with your clock.
I did before bedtime sometimes.
Okay, so red light comes during the day.
Right. Okay. It's the same reason why I take my vitamin D in the morning. Because it's actually a hormone, and you would ordinarily get generated during the day. So
if that's when you can get to it, but some people find that it can affect their sleep. But I think it's some people who are more sensitive than others. Their cortisol levels are high. I think if you need to get it in wherever you can get it. Heat in the evening, cold plunge in the morning. I think that's another one. If you're doing those, or those are part of your routine, heat at night can help with. I have a heat sauna kind of bag, one of those little bags I slip into in the living room just to warm my body up, and then your body starts this cooling mechanism. So,
you have a sauna bag?
A sauna bag.
That sounds cool.
Yeah,
I need one of those.
And it's from Australia, but it's got an infrared kind of a heat source, and it's like you're wrapping yourself in this little warm burrito, like a little warm cocoon, and it's just kind of relaxing. And if your bones are aching a little bit from workouts and stuff, it just relaxes you.
Okay, that's very cool.
Yeah.
We'll include that pillow as well.
Yeah.
Okay, so give me your favorite book, excluding your own, and who people should follow on YouTube or for more sort of advice.
Kate Shanahan, who wrote the foreword for her book, she's one of the first to call out the seed oils.
Okay.
Her book, Deep Nutrition, which talks about the four or five. It's been a while since it came out, but 4 pillars of health, we're talking about fermented foods, and really pointed out that, like, for instance, we've talked about vegetables before. When ancient civilizations or older civilizations ate vegetation, they had to ferment it. They had to
Grill-
cook it.
grill all
Sometimes
the
they even let it
toxins,
sit
yeah.
in the stomach of the animal they just killed. So it's like they got to break that down. So there was talk about meat on the bone and fermented foods and fresh vegetables. And I think she has been a pioneer in calling out these things that most of us just had no clue on. They weren't on our radar. So the seed oils, the cooking meat on the bone and getting that nutrition from basically looking at, so it's called Deep Nutrition. So it's one of my favorite books for reference for just how to eat a great whole food diet. So it's been, and that really kicked, I think that was the biggest one that kicked me off onto seed
Does she have a
oils.
YouTube channel as well?
She has a blog that's extensive stuff like that. She
Okay.
doesn't do a lot on YouTube. She has two bestseller books, Fat Burn Fix and
Okay, I'm gonna have to get on the show then.
You should. She was the nutritional director for the LA Lakers for a number of years.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, I
Is
think
she
she's
in
got a place in
California?
Colorado now.
Okay, Colorado. Okay.
Yeah,
I'll try.
but
and get
she
on
wrote the
show.
forward for a book. I've respected her for years. So when I reached out to her, I was just really excited what she said.
Well, is it shout out to her if you'd like to be on the show. Open
yes,
invitation.
Kate Shanahan.
Kate.
You opened my eyes to seed oils.
That's great.
And as far as fitness goes, man, I feel like I'm learning more and more from these guys who are just kind of lesser known.
Yeah.
Not really much books, but they've got YouTube channels, or they have a presence where they have Patreons and things like that, and really digging into not overtraining, basically how to get the benefit of training.
recovery.
Yeah, recovery.
That's what I'm learning right now. Is recovery is just basically like 9/10 of the law of good health.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't recover, you're just gonna strain your muscles. You're gonna strain your body. You're not gonna grow muscles as much. Muscles become catabolic at some point when you're overtraining. You actually start losing muscle.
Correct.
Especially because it's almost impossible to eat enough
because you're not
food.
recovering.
Exactly, and recover properly for it. So I've learned that.
Yes. Yeah. I think Matthew Walker's book, Why We Sleep, is a great
Okay.
one for understanding the stages of sleep
Okay.
and why they're important, and really get us to pay attention to just why sleep's important, but those stages of sleep of getting to bed earlier.
Yeah.
And when those, like deep sleep usually comes early in the evening, and then the REM sleep usually comes later, and how to facilitate those phases.
What time do you go to bed at night?
Not as early as I'd like. Ideally is 10.
Okay.
But I've got kids and
Yeah,
family,
yeah.
and the wife doesn't always want to go. So it's just, but ideal for me is
And then you're up at like 5?
5:30. Depends on
Okay.
when I have to get out the door.
Yeah.
But yeah, ish is, if I'm being honest, it's
Yeah.
it's 10:15 is the ideal time.
So you function well in 6 or 7 hours sleep at night?
I could function better, but it's hard for me to get 8. Like I almost have to.
I can't stay asleep that long.
I can't either.
Yeah, I struggle.
No, and then in the weekend I might make up by like a nap in the afternoon. But I mean, if I get more than 6, closer to 7,
Once
I
I'm
feel
over 7, I'm
fantastic.
okay. Once I'm over 7, I'm
7,
good.
yeah. But it's also the quality. It's
Yeah.
it's looking at or when you have the whoop.
Yeah.
If I'm getting enough deep sleep and REM sleep is really what seems to affect how I feel. And I could be in bed if I've eaten late. I don't. If I get 7.5 hours of sleep, but I may only get 10 hours of deep sleep because my temperature's elevated, my heart rate's elevated, and I'm not getting as much deep sleep. So the quality, its quantity is there, but the quality isn't. And
If I get less than 5 hours sleep a night, I'm a wreck. If I'm in like 4.5 hours of sleep, I'm just not functioning.
Oh no! I can't remember my name.
Yeah. Well, everyone else will. Thank you, Zane Griggs.
Thank you.
And we'll put all your links to your channels and whatnot in the show notes below.
Thank you.
But for those listening, maybe on Spotify, zanegriggs.com.
Yes, Instagram, Zane Griggs Fitness. That's where I'm most active. Is Instagram. I've got a YouTube that's Zane Griggs, but zanegriggs.com will have all my handles. So.
Okay, awesome. Excited to have you. Thank you so much. This is a
Thank
great
you.
show.